It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Hello to everyone. Welcome to the program. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. In previous episodes, we have discussed 7 questions and answers about Darwinian evolution. We begin today with question 8. Does the Cambrian Explosion prove Darwin's theory of evolution? First, let's review what the Cambrian Explosion actually is. More than 500 million years ago, Earth was a quiet place compared to the vibrant, bustling planet we know today. Life did exist, but it was simple, subtle, almost mundane. The oceans were home to single-celled organisms and soft-bodied creatures that crept slowly across the seafloor. For billions of years, life had remained in this subdued, static state. Then around 530 to 541 million years ago, something extraordinary happened in what geologists and biologists call the Cambrian Explosion. Life as we know it burst into being into what is called biology's Big Bang. It was a rapid diversification of complex life on Earth when most major animal phyla first appeared. The Cambrian Explosion was an event that filled the Earth with complexity and innovation. The exact causes of the Cambrian Explosion remain debated, but it represents one of the most important events in the history of life, as it set the stage for modern animal diversity. In what seems like a geological blink of an eye, actually spanning 20 to 25 million years, an explosion of innovation flooded the earth. Animals with hard shells, jointed legs, spiny exoskeletons, and complex eyes appeared. Ecosystems diversified, and ecological interactions grew increasingly sophisticated. Almost every major animal group alive at the present time, arthropods, mollusks, echinoderms, can trace its origins back to the critical moment in the Earth's history. The Cambrian Explosion was not merely a chapter in the story of life. It was the span of time when the appearance of new phyla shifted gears and unveiled the astonishing creativity of nature. To explore this event is to peer back into the dawn of animal diversity, a time when the blueprint of modern ecosystems was first revealed. Thus, the Cambrian Explosion marked a turning point. Suddenly, diversity surged. Fossil deposits from this time, such as the Burgess Shale in Canada and the Xinjiang biota in China, reveal a panoramic display of new forms. These fossils showed creatures with shells, spines, and appendages. They reveal predators with grasping claws and tusks, whereas their prey appears with defensive armor like turtles and armadillos. They show for the first time a dynamic arms race between hunter and hunted. Darwin predicted that in the fossil record we would find evidence that life would begin simply and would progress into big differences. But the Cambrian Explosion refutes that prediction and thus does not support Darwin's theory of evolution. Question 9. Was there a gradual transition from an ape to a human? Despite the illustrations in textbooks showing a march of beings in an ascending row that displays a gradual transition from a small chimpanzee to a regular-sized ape to an even larger transition figure and eventually to a human, no evidence is offered to support that illustration because it is not there. Virtually every missing link or find has turned out to be ape-like and non-human, not a transition kind of an ape man. In fact, some so-called finds were deliberate hoaxes. If living things had really evolved from other kinds of creature, as Darwin claims, then one would think that the fossil record should show many intermediate or transitional forms with some sort of halfway structures. But the transitional links are missing from the fossil record. Charles Darwin was worried that the fossil record did not show what his theory predicted. In the 6th edition of The Origin of Species, he wrote, "Why is not every geological formation which can be urged and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory." This means that Darwin's theory is refuted in every other scientific domain, in mathematics, physics, chemistry, astronomy, computer science, and perhaps in geology, meteorology, oceanography, and even in philosophy. If such a counterexample is displayed against their theory, the theory would be abandoned. But not so in Darwinian theory. That is not science. That's burying your head in the sand and keeping your mind closed. The mind is like a parachute. It only works when it is open. However, if different kinds had been created separately, the fossil record should show creatures appearing abruptly and fully formed. That is what the Cambrian Explosion shows. Shouldn't the general public and the scientific community be open to the possibility of creation? In the book Refuting Evolution, Dr. Jonathan Soparty reports that the late Dr. Colin Patterson, senior paleontologist of the British Museum of Natural History and author of the book Evolution, replied to a questioner who asked Dr. Patterson why he had not included any pictures of transitional forms. Patterson replied, "I fully agree with your comments about the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. Richard Leakey, in his time the world's foremost paleoanthropologist, said, "If pressed about man's ancestry, I would have to unequivocally say that all we have is a huge question mark. If further pressed, I would have to state that there is more evidence to suggest an abrupt arrival of man rather than a gradual process of evolving." Harold Urey, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry in 1934 for the discovery of deuterium, the heavy hydrogen, who was one of the participants in the Miller-Urey experiment and played a significant role in the development of the atomic bomb, reports, "All of us who study the origin of life, that the more we look into it, the more we feel that it is too complex to have evolved anywhere. We believe, as an article of faith, that life evolved from dead matter on this planet. It is just that its complexity is so great, it is hard for us to imagine that it did." Charles Darwin himself also made similar remarks. In a correspondence to Asa Gray, cited by Adrian Desmond and James Moore in what is hailed as the definitive biography entitled Darwin, published by W. W. Norton and Company in 1994 on pages 456 and 475, Darwin says, "I am quite conscious that my speculations run beyond the bounds of science. It is mere rag of an hypothesis, with as many flaws and holes as sound parts." Darwin also wrote in The Origin of Species, "To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree." The renowned Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould wrote in the book Evolution Now, a Century After Darwin, edited by John Maynard Smith, page 140, "The absence of fossil evidence for intermediate stages between major transitions in organic design, indeed in our inability, even in our imagination, to construct functional intermediates in many cases, has been a persistent and nagging problem for gradualistic accounts of evolution." Also in a 1984 article in Natural History, Volume 93, Part 2, pages 14 to 23, entitled "The Ediacaran Experiment," Gould writes, "I regard the failure to find a clear vector of progress in life's history as the most puzzling fact of the fossil record. Those remarks are in total agreement to what I have said previously, that the transitional links are missing in the fossil record. Millions of fossils have been discovered since the time of Darwin. Moreover, many hundreds of thousands of these fossils have been identified. Not one single example is a missing link. The fossil record that Darwin hoped for was never discovered. Why? Because the transitional links never existed. You might recall that Gould is the one who said, "Evolution is a fact, fact, fact." It seems to me that he should have considered the fossil record before making that comment. If he had, then he should have said, evolution is dubious, dubious, dubious. Allow me to close this episode by reminding you, exercise daily. Walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.